Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today, and apologies for the slight delay, tech issues as always. My name is Diana Nyakundi. I am an AI Research Fellow at Research ICT Africa. So this webinar today is being convened by Research ICT Africa, and we'll get to hear a lot more about it. I think for the purposes of time, you can feel free to use the chat section to introduce yourself, where you're from, where you're joining us from. We will have ample time for Q&A session throughout this session. So don't worry about that. We'll take your input, and we hope that this session can be interactive and engaging. So just a brief introduction on why we're here today. We are on behalf of the Africa Development Bank, we are conducting a study on DPI in Africa and a certain number of countries. I won't go too deep into it because, we have speakers who go deeper into that, but we thought to have a community of practice around the continent and overboard to just bring in kind of inputs and conversations around what is happening in DPI to strengthen the research that we're doing and to get, expert feedback, to listen and learn from what is happening on the ground and in the work that you're doing, to kind of validate the research that we are doing as we continue with the project. And just to have this platform where we can share knowledge and exchange on DPI around the continent. So with that, I will hand over to George, who is from AFDB, to kind of give an overview and a brief overview on the project. And then we'll, after that, hand over to Alison, who is leading this project from Research ICT Africa, to give an understanding of what we've done. And then we'll hand over to Bill, who is going to take us through the methodology and the research design and the kind of mapping work that we have done so far. And then after that, then we'll get into the Q&A session, which I hope will be very interactive and engaging. Thank you so much once again for joining us, and over to you, George.
Thank you very much, Diane. Can you all hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you very much. Now, good day, and thank you very much to Research ICT Africa and to Co-Develop for hosting us today. Now, I want to begin by briefly saying that the African Development Bank stands behind this community of practice and why we're doing this right now rather than at the end of a much larger and longer process. Now, the bank is the continent's premier development finance institution, and digital transformation sits at the center of how we work on inclusive growth, regional integration, poverty reduction, the entire scope of our mandate, really. And our digital transformation action plan treats the sector as an enabler rather than a sector on its own, focusing on inclusive infrastructure, ecosystem development, and lastly, about sectoral adoption. Now, our portfolio reflects this and is growing very rapidly. We have committed in the order of $3.5 billion to ICT infrastructure, digital platforms, digital economy enablers across our regional member countries. And the pipeline, of course, continues to expand year on year. Just to give you a bit of context, earlier this year, for example, our board approved a $200 million loan for DeVi project in Nigeria, which is part of a $2 billion project where the bank was the mandated lead arranger, which will take national fiber backbone from around 30 kilometers of fiber to some 120,000 kilometers of fiber. Now, the composition of spending is changing as well. We're deliberately increasing our share that is structured around digital public infrastructure and DPI-like approaches. So not only talking about the infrastructure part, but really taking from the connectivity to the data infrastructure through identity, payments, digital public services, and the institutional layers that keep systems running, to be very frank. Now, all this moves through a structured process, through identification, preparation, and appraisal, where we're very much keen to learn how individual countries are addressing questions pertaining to digital public infrastructure, where the DPI study that Diane already mentioned comes in. Now, often those questions underlying where different countries stand in terms of digital public infrastructure is a lot harder to answer in some contexts rather than others. And in all honesty, it is a lot harder to answer behind a desk at headquarters than it is on the ground. So this is where I would like to be very clear about how we understand DPI. We're not interested in the technology as a trend, but rather how this underpins the interest as DPI as a social compact between states and citizens, one that creates public value and that citizens have good reasons to trust. Identity payments, data exchanges, etc., have a deciding factor whether a social transfer reaches a household, whether health records follow a patient, whether a trader can move goods through under the FCFTA. Now, these efficiency gains are real and are not only being considered. Now, the sovereignty, safeguards, etc., are the KPIs that make DPI thrive. Now, we could not answer all of these questions on our own, and in all honesty, we did not try to. This is where the collaboration with Co-Develop and RIA comes in. Now, Co-Develop brought the resourcing and a global perspective in terms of this willingness to fund an evidence base rather than to prescribe a model. The partnership with us has been about co-developing, for lack of a better pun, with a regional development bank from the very beginning, which was really started at the beginning of last year. So from the inception, we decided to work with Co-Develop and as well as with RIA rather than at the end. Now, Research ICT Africa brought what really no other external partner could, which was a perspective of I think about 25 years of public interest research. And having worked with RIA on numerous other initiatives, we're very keen to move to also work with RIA specifically on the case studies and the roadmaps, as well as the databases pertaining to digital public infrastructure today. Now, we are really culminating this work today, as a matter of fact. Now, this community of practice is where this work stops being a study and becomes something that stays with us, that becomes very real. Whether it's regulators, academics, civic technologists, startups, etc., that are convened here today, this is the evidence that is currently driving all of these factors that we've talked about, that I mentioned earlier, whether it be the social compact or whether it's a trust that citizens really give and invest in this social compact, is delivered by each and every one of us today. And therefore, we're very keen to support the deliberations of this community of practice. Now, what we're asking for is honestly quite simple, and that is to engage and to also opine for us to understand where those needs are, where potential solutions are, and above all, what we can do to make things better. On that note, thank you very much. And once again, thank you very much for investing your time to be here today. Without further ado, I would now like to hand over to colleagues at RIA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George, for your opening remarks. Very wonderful introduction to why we're here today and to the project. I think I'll just hand over to Alison to take it away with the project. Sorry, Alison, you're on mute.
I'm trying to retrieve my sound.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you. I'm now going to get back to my presentation. I'll be with you in a sec. Let me just go there. And you can see the screen, the shared screen. Oh, good, because I can't, so I'm going to be back on my presentation. Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to George for setting that context. And of course, to the African Development Bank and Co-Develop, who have a very big logo at the end of the page, and I see not at the beginning, but it's very much been a collaboration that arose out of the G20 work, in fact, on DPI, in which the South African presidency worked very closely with the African Union and with other knowledge partners from UNDP and from UCL and the ITU, and really confronted some of the issues around trying to deploy DPI in an African context, and also address the important issues that had been identified in the G20 process from the Indian presidency, which introduced the concept of digital public infrastructures through Brazil to South Africa, which was the issue of the kind of missing governance framework. So the action item for the Brazilian G20 was to provide a more detailed, specifically data governance framework for DPI. And of course, Brazil had a very strong, broader data governance and data justice mandate and focus of their work, particularly in relation to climate change as a special project, but also in relation to DPI, but never ultimately produced the data governance for DPI framework that South Africa took up the mantle for. It was a more extended integrated governance framework that looked at data as well as other regulatory requirements, infrastructural requirements. But there was also, a lot of discussion around what would be required to get a effective data governance framework or an integrated governance framework for DPI in an African context. Many of you are familiar with, and of course, there have been several more playbooks and frameworks on DPI. They have, by and large, and I think a lot has been written on this by lots of people. They've been mostly sort of very technically focused. They've been sort of techno-legal frameworks. I think some of the legal framing was a lot of qualification and improvement of some of the pure sort of, techno-solutionist sort of stacks that were presented to countries as panaceas for a whole lot of far more challenging developmental problems. And then, of course, we have had some very excellent technical critiques of those, which are trying to look more at the impacts of the whole on society, and also, of course, by extension, some of the opportunities that you would need to realize DPI for it to be more transformative. But what there really hasn't been, we hadn't felt adequately, and particularly this was the line that was taken up for this particular project, was understanding the underlying political economy of countries in which DPI would be implemented, but particularly, of course, in the African context, understanding how what we needed to do to make these solve these problems that we were trying to solve. So we looked at many of the definitions that were being used. Many of them are focused on the technology. There have recently been some that move away from a purely technological approach. Some of the World Bank and OECD things are obviously looking more at digital transformation. And then, of course, broadly development or sort of contributing to sustainable development goals. But by and large, they still tend to be a technological solution or a digital transformation or digitalization processes to improve public services or even more broadly in society. And what we've tried to do here, and we'll be sharing with you today and looking for your feedback on, is really understanding DPI as an approach to solve, long-standing developmental and underdevelopment challenges that we've faced on the continent, and that we have, a litany of technology skeletons or technology failures. That the technology can do everything, but either the political economies, the institutional arrangements, the human development challenges, the possibilities, the resource challenges around innovation simply don't exist on the ground. So we will see that what we will do is identify these far more significant challenges that Africa generally, although it's very diverse and we've got very nice diverse cases to show these differences, needs to do in order to be able to use this technology in order for it to be as transformative as it would need to be to solve the kind of problems that we are facing. So as I said, there've been many of these. I think there's well-recognized understanding that basically a lot of these systems have assumptions that simply don't pertain in many of our countries. A lot of them have been applied. Of course, the famous Adha case is a very large scale, big use case, very successful, very critiqued, of course, lots of challenges in getting it to where it is now. But a lot of the other use cases are very, a successful case for DPI in agriculture or health or something like that. And we really, the way we are approaching it, it needs to be understood as this, fully integrated ecosystem that is able to deliver on these big, much greater social good to deliver social good outcomes. So basically, I said I think some of the other definitions are moving towards this being an approach to something that you're using these technologies, but not many of them are actually understanding the approach from a political economy perspective. As I said, we see these different blueprints. There's value in many of them. Many of them you will see in the way that we are identifying what are the critical infrastructures, what they need to achieve in order to fulfill some of the immediate contributing functions are there. But basically, the problems that we're trying to solve, the bigger problems that we're trying to solve, are quite different and arise from an understanding of the diverse African political economies, but which have several common elements from them arising from, neo-colonial political settlement, structural inequalities and structural differences that at a geopolitical level between very many developing countries and other countries as well. Some of these assumptions really often relate to rights frameworks or political frameworks or democratic frameworks that are in place that in many cases are not. Often the regulatory bodies, everybody says how important institutions are, but there's very often little explanation for why existing institutional arrangements are ineffectual or incapacitated, or what the interests are at play there. There's very often not very much acknowledgement, or there's a brief acknowledgement, but not really any effort to demonstrate what you do, you do about it in terms of human development. And I think what our case studies have really highlighted is that you can't just do a technical DPI readiness or maturity assessment. It's not a sort of straightforward gap analysis that you can put an infrastructure requirement to, put a budget to, and hope that that's going to give you those kinds of outcomes. And so the project has entailed looking at more classically at power and interests and institutional contexts, both at a geopolitical level, which has become an increasingly important or challenging context for implementation of DPI with our dependence on, well, firstly, our dependence on data and data digitalization, but also the dependence on cloud and AI, increasingly, inevitably on AI. That is, part of a geoeconomic crisis that we find ourselves in at the moment, in terms of the weaponization of trade, of linking of data to rare earth minerals and these kinds of things that countries are facing, with already profound developmental challenges in relation to running their countries in terms of state formation. And then I think also what we've just done is, a lot of the playbooks, a lot of the literature even of this from multilateral organizations, often because of the nature of multilateral organizations, member state membership and those kinds of things, are simply having sort of decoupled the political, sometimes even the governance questions, but even the governance questions are very often presented apolitically. And I think as soon as you begin to start collecting empirical evidence of these kinds of things, it's clear that these are, primarily political decisions. What your institutions look like, what is being deployed, how resources are being deployed. These are essentially political institutions. And we do think that with a political economy analysis and identification of where these challenges are, recognition of where these challenges are, and with a lot of literature, body of literature from A. Smuglu to Robinson and Stevenson, but to Peter Evans on developmental state, on various political economy and underdeveloped literature that we can draw on to identify, without being able to, without, of course, thinking that DPI can address some of these bigger structural issues, that it can contribute to creating more viable states, that it can contribute to state formation and can deal with some of the fundamental issues or challenges of inequality, but that those will require, the development of appropriate and contextually relevant institutional frameworks. And so that, we can't just treat this inequality as a technical deficiency, and if you put a few things in place, it's going to work. Often there's an acknowledgement of it, but not really a recognition that this is an outcome of, a political and historical outcome that needs to be addressed in that context. And so that we think that there is the risk with DPI, technical solutionist sort of rollout of these of various stacks that are being promoted across the continent, is that without this kind of analysis that the bank can do in the background before it obviously does its more financial sort of due diligence and things, is that we will be reproducing these extractive institutional logics of the neo-colonial post-settlements, etc., in their digital form. And so the political economy approach allows us to assess the country's capability to deploy their investment on the basis of this independent contextual assessment of its needs, looking at its institutional endowments, the political will to see this through. I think most of the case studies demonstrate that without that, and it has to be political will, not to develop, a surveillance state or whatever, but to develop something that is got the developmental objectives that we've spoken about. And really, the idea is that in the bank's recognition of these, I suppose, kind of, need for soft investments or soft infrastructure governance, that is going to be absolutely essential to DPI being transformative and effective in contributing to development, as George has mentioned. We will need to, we will be able to de-risk the investments of the bank by looking at what the country's needs are, assessing how much is, for them to identify what they need done, and then, of course, to get even at the moment, sort of costs of existing investments that would be the foundations, or be in some cases, digital ID has already gone way ahead, even though we don't have some of the broadband infrastructure in place. So some of these assessments would allow the bank's investments to be risk mitigated in some way by providing the countries that are getting the investments with implementation roadmaps or capacity assessment tools that they can use to plan and sequence these investments and know what to do once they've made the decision to proceed with these. So I think there's just a couple of things we wanted to say before we get into the mapping, which is the main purpose of today's exercise. The bank, in deciding what evidence it needed to make these investment decisions, together with Code of Edip, it was agreed that we would do a sort of political economy framing, and you'll see those coming through in the cases, which will be presented in the next community of practice. But you'll certainly see in the mapping our efforts to use proxies and things for less quantifiable indicators. But it was also to develop a picture of what is happening on the continent from this political economy perspective, to do some deep dive cases across the continent. And obviously they're not resources to do too many, but we do have a very good spread. And I am hoping, I was introduced as leading this project, but a lot of people have been working really excitingly on these cases and on the mapping. And we've had, Lucian Adam on Ethiopia, and Folo Dufua in Nigeria, and Jules Diglia in Benin, and Paulo Mavula in Mozambique. So the people who are really trying to get a kind of deep dive into these countries, and then of course many on the RIA team who hopefully will be participating in today's event as well. We've got Thomas Linda, who's been leading the project internally, and Roland Banya on the team as well, on some of the financial stuff, and Gabby Rosano also working on South Africa. So I'm going to sort of wrap up this section quite quickly so that we can get into the mapping. But just to say that everybody has really contributed to this review of a political economy approach in the context of DPI. And just to say that I think you'll see from the cases that we do have very specific challenges in Africa, and require specific solutions to them. But you will also see that we really do think, particularly, as I'll mention, from a Pan-African perspective, that this really presents an opportunity for Africa to address some of these big challenges. And then I just wanted to say, we'll come back to it, because that will be also, we'll return to the political framing and the geopolitical framing. But just to say that from a financial sustainability, from a funding point of view, from an effective use of resources point of view, is that you will see from the mapping that there's this incredible fragmentation around digitalization within countries, between countries, and of course even at the global level, which many people are working on. But then there are these implications also for the current deployment of DPI components is astronomical for Africa currently. And most of that money is going out of the country. So the enormous hemorrhaging, not only of money but of data out of the country, and that this central issue you will see from the way we've presented these case studies is that the data is the public good. It's the thing that allows us to improve management, coordinate activities, integrate infrastructures, and is a lot of it is currently privately enclosed in ways that do not allow it to be used in the public interest. And so looking at those aspects of governance are quite important to this, and that the management of that data is not only an issue of risks and safeguards, but it's really around what we'll need for balancing this private value creation, which is the broader kind of objective, and local private value creation, which is also an important aspect of this if it is going to be transformative locally. So just very quickly then, our four pillars, which I think the latest, the World Bank reports and the OECD have now also kind of put those at least visibly into the DPI. But we have got this power and broadband issue. We've got the digital identity issues, which has really been very contested. I think a lot of focus has been put on digital ID without some of the necessary underlying attention to some of the underlying issues. We've got a big challenge around registries, which Bill will speak to at the moment, but large parts of which are simply not digitalized. And then, of course, we've got the big challenges around people's lack of digital literacy or even connectivity to be able to engage in an inclusive way. And then, as I said, we've got issues around digital payments. I think there's been a lot of optimism because of alternative financial inclusion mechanisms in Africa, but creating sort of the kind of integrated turnkey digital payment systems that you need for DPI is certainly a considerable challenge, particularly when so many people still remain offline. And then, of course, from the case studies, it's become clear that the most neglected pillar has been this data exchange. And then, of course, the governance layer that overlies this as well, to make sure that can be the glue for this. So I think I'm sort of running out of time, and I've spoken about a number of these before. But I just did want to say that, this DPI has been an issue that we've been working on for a long time, especially during COVID and before the Indian G20. And I think it's, the importance of understanding the potential where you have large informal sectors, where one of the biggest challenges for developing countries in development and underdevelopment has been, state formation and the ability of the state to deliver on the social compact that George was speaking about, to provide sort of security services, economic well-being, etc. for the state. And so while DPI allows citizens to become visible to the state, obviously that's under the right conditions. That's not a risk, but something that allows the state not only to better collect tax revenue, collect revenues, but also redistribute, provide social protection, etc. So we see DPI in terms of an approach as really an approach to address one of these key developmental challenges of state formation, and capital and labor formation, institutional capacity through better use of data, etc., and also, of course, the physical human capacity that would be required as well. But without the governance frameworks, without the rights frameworks, etc., it can also, of course, reinforce these inequalities and undermine those state formation efforts. I've spoken about the geopolitics, and I've spoken a little bit about the neo-colonial conditions in which we find ourselves. I think, it's just in terms of some of the core risks. What a lot of the frameworks are showing is that although trust is very high up in the rhetoric in the beginning, and the cases are showing, and because it's in, it is very visible in most of the playbooks and that, there's not really, there are two things. One is that it tends to be equated with data protection and cybersecurity, so that if you have, tick those boxes, then you've got a trusted system. And I think there's been a lot of work, and we highlighted it very well in the African Union data policy framework, that, trust comes from, it's a political, it's a political outcome. It comes from legitimacy. And we really think that if DPI under the right conditions could contribute to fulfillment of the social compact, it could provide states, delivery of services, and provide states with legitimacy, trust in the systems that would make them more effective, etc. And you could get this sort of virtuous cycle instead of the quite vicious cycle that we have of exclusion and inequality. And then, of course, absolutely critical to any sort of Pan-African solutions that we're looking at in terms of African Continental Free Trade Area and those kinds of things. Absolutely critical that we really acknowledge the digital inequality paradox, and that without, addressing some of these issues, DPI will serve people who are currently already better off than the people who are marginalized from services. We've seen that with our tax systems and various things, that work fabulously if you happen to be connected and enough money and stuff to make the system work.
Alison, we're at time. We need to move along.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go to this last slide, which I think will frame the mapping a little bit more, but I won't spend too much on it. But just to speak about the conceptual framework that we've used for the cases in the mapping. As I've mentioned, this is essentially, we see this as essentially contributing to this fundamental issue of state formation. And through that, you would get these enhanced public service delivery, improved market shaping. You could enhance market shaping, also very contested, and hopefully we'll come back and be able to spend a little bit more time on that, especially in our economies. But it has the potential there to contribute to enhancing competition and better consumer welfare outcomes. And then local private creation, absolutely critical in ensuring that, if you want SME participation and inclusion of citizens and that sort of thing, that it really is built into your regulations and your procurement systems and those kinds of things. And that as a whole would give you, this broader public value creation that we're looking at, which is not only the public sector coordination that we've spoken about, but for something that would service the whole of society. But in order to do that, you have these kind of, these relational things, which is what this matrix is trying to show, is that, to get, to deliver on the social compact, you need those institutional arrangements. You need, allocation of state powers, administrative justice, and those kinds of things. If you have that, you can see it feeds into all the verticals that we've spoken about there. Regulation and governance, more specifically, from that, for different financial, telecommunications, information, etc. So there's a lot of interagency coordination that is required there for this to be effective. And then absolutely critically, the data exchange, the real glue between the digital ID, the digital payment systems, and then the value-added platform on top. And the idea of this conceptual framework is that it has been used for the cases, and that we got evidence to understand these relations. But it also will allow us to develop the implementation roadmap, which for the bank's purposes needs to be fiscally grounded. And we are arguing very much, instead of it just being a supply side valuation of resources, that we look very systematically at the demand side valuation of resources. And that's how you will get to the public, that's how you will realize public value. But that also, in getting this understanding, this could provide a sort of self-needs and capacity, a self-assessment tool on, what institutional capabilities, expenditure, funding, etc., that you may need, by looking at where you need, where you stand now and what your needs are, to if you buy into the public value, and the idea that you have to really get all these pieces to work together if you are aiming for these broader social good outcomes, which will shift us from a sort of short-term sort of efficiency maximization. Not that that's not important, but to looking at some sort of longer term social good outcomes. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop there. And ask Bill to carry on. Diana, over to you.
Thanks, Alison. I was actually just going to hand it over to Bill.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Bill Anderson. I'm a freelance consultant. I'm from South Africa, but based in London now, and I've the last 10 years been working on data governance, digital transformation across Africa. And it's been good fun to work with Ria on this project. When we started, we weren't clear on which countries we were working with, and so we were continually sort of trying to get sort of a data mapping plan together with sort of a moving target, and started collecting, for up to a dozen countries, and suddenly realized, well, actually, can we manage collecting data across the whole continent? And wouldn't it be nice if we could have a full-time researcher in every one of the 54 countries, pulling together sort of validated, ground-truthed data? If one could do that, though, there would still be a challenge of how, if you're wanting to pull it together, that how you would standardize it so that you could turn that into comparable data. But I think two things have changed in the last couple of years. One, obviously, the technology that we are all playing with at the moment, and seeing what it can and can't do. But also the public evidence base, that the way in which both trade journals and national newspapers have come online and are producing a level of information that was, just 2 years ago, just didn't exist. I mean, if you look at these sources, I mean, if you are researching digital ID, 80% of the data you need is you're going to find in biometric update. It's a trade journal that has incredibly deep coverage over a number of areas. And similarly, I mean, across there are, I now trawl a dozen different trade papers. And again, sort of looking through, I mean, in every single country in Africa now, you're getting more information coming out of the national press. Great resource there that is waiting to be tapped. Over the last 9 months, we've actually sort of progressed through a number of stages. We started in the beginning to say, well, standard large language models, at that stage, particularly OpenAI and Google, they weren't that great on search. And so we sort of jumped onto Perplexity, which had a real-time search engine, and started collecting. The problem in the early days was that to collect data on 54 countries, you had to run each, to get to granularity, you had to run each country and each sector separately to get the deep granularity. So it involved a lot of manual processing, and even if each search took 10 minutes, when you've got half a dozen sectors across 54 countries, that still adds up to a lot of minutes. 6 months ago, Perplexity Computer came along, which is an orchestrator, which has allowed us then to run sub-agents so that you could then, in one bash, start collecting data across all the countries. And that was great, except it became incredibly expensive. In fact, exorbitantly so. And this has happened across all the AI tools at the moment. Microsoft at one stage had to tell their staff to stop using OpenAI because they'd run out of their budget. We reached a bit of a dead end with Perplexity. We then found an even better search engine, which is called AXA. which also is a hell of a lot cheaper than Perplexity. And so we've ended up now with a model which uses Claude Code and EXA, which searches and fetches the data. And at this stage, that is an affordable model that allows us to collect on an ongoing basis data across on a regular basis across all countries. I mean, the way this works is a step so that we go through the collection of data using the search and fetch of EXA. We then put it into Claude and we analyze it and we assess it, and you'll see from the dashboard that we've tried to make the various data comparable across different countries. And then we turned it into a single standard data set so that we could compare all the countries. I know there are going to be a lot of questions about how reliable is this data, and of course it is not 100% accurate. It's getting better all the time, but to mitigate against the sort of the proverbial hallucinations of AI, we've been on a learning curve. If you query with very detailed metadata, if you give these search engines a very structured environment in which to say, we need this, and this is the way we want you to look for it, and this is exactly the way we want you to return the data. So it's from that learning how to prompt these tools, and then using red teaming, so using a separate model from the one that collected the data to go and inspect your data and play devil's advocate on it and double check the data. And then, of course, you've got to ground truth that you can't ground truth at all. But what we have found in the data we've collected and the way in which we've then shared it with our country experts and said, is there anything really crazy in what we're producing? No, there wasn't. Was it comprehensive? No, of course there are gaps. Particularly, I mean, obviously we're going to be a lot stronger on systems, on policies, on strategies, and far weaker on impact, on citizen feedback, because that is where the data is at the moment. But yeah, it is getting better all the time. And I guess the bottom line question is, can we afford not to do this? So what we can now do with the system, and it's a relatively simple model that we have developed, that it is possible now to run, say, on a monthly basis, to go through the existing database, check every row in that database to see, does the evidence and the source that's provided that evidence still exist? Is it the best evidence that does exist? Are there other new sources? And then we convert that from a database in using sort of a geographical framework to put it out on a dashboard. And so we've built, well, I'm going to show you the dashboard now. We've built this as something to hand over to the bank. And as I say, it is now at a stage where it is affordable, I think, to maintain this and to update it on a regular basis. Right, I'm going to go when I find out. Oops, where am I? Okay, so this is the dashboard we brought. Now let me show you the geography of the screen. Across here, we have now got 11 separate data sets that sit behind this dashboard. 6 of them we've collected the data ourselves, and the other 5 we've just grabbed data from third-party data sets. All the metadata and the methodology for that are linked to on this page. For each one of these data sets, then we've divided it into a number of sections, and in each section there are a number of variables. For each variable that you're displaying, it's got a definition of the variable here, and then what we've done is that we've managed, sort of shoehorned all the data across all these variables into a 0 to 5 scale and using the same colors all throughout. So red is bad, and this teal, bluey green is good, and using the same colors across so that it's quite easy to compare.
Bill?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're not seeing your screen.
Oh. I don't, hang on, let me do this again. Did you see the presentation?
Oh, okay. Other
Yeah.
people can see it. Other people can see it.
Yeah, we could see it, but not now.
Yeah. Hang on, I'm coming back.
Sorry, Bill, carry on.
Okay,
Yeah,
you can
thank
see my
you.
screen, yeah?
Yes.
Right, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to run through. Oh, sorry. The other thing that I haven't shown you is that if you come over, click on any country, on the right-hand side, then you will see the evidence and a source for not only the particular variable it's showing, but all the variables within this section. So all the sourcing of the values we've given this data are available for inspection straight through the dashboard. I'm just going to run through a couple of examples just to show the kind of thing that we've been sort of showing up. I mean, if we look at the connectivity, you'll see here we've got mobile phone penetration, which is pretty good across the whole of the continent. But we go to the internet usage, and we know this year that it's all very well having connectivity, but if people can't afford to use it, we're still in the same trap and in the digital inequality paradox that Alison spoke about. If we look at data exchange, we'll see in terms of system development, none are fully operational yet, but there's a lot of progress in people are sort of trying to look at planning, starting to develop data exchange systems. But again, if we go on to the uptake and we look then at whatever is happening, it isn't happening in rural areas at all. So that it is any coverage at a rural level, or for that matter, sort of the difference between subnational participation within the data exchange. If we look at digital ID, and again, a lot of systems now are, they're in most countries, you've got digital ID systems that are partially deployed. People love their biometrics. Lots of biometric activity going on throughout the continent. But if we go then to uptake and look at what point people are getting their digital ID, and the majority of countries, you've got to be over the age of 10, if not 17, to get your digital ID. Furthermore, oops, no, I don't want to go there. More than half the countries in Africa, you've got to pay for your digital. I mean, not to register, but to have an ID card or a wallet. It all costs money. On digital pay, we can look, say, the great sort of media success story of how person-to-person payments are the thing that is sort of revolutionized Africa to leapfrog other systems. But in fact, if again we look at the uptake and we look at how many people are actually using these systems, well, you see Kenya, yes, there's plenty of usage in Kenya, but that hasn't followed in the rest of the continent. To quick look at the registries and out of the work that's been done, that just realizing that these registries, the population register, the address register, the tax register, the land register, are key parts of infrastructure. But if we look at the population register, a lot of them exist either partially or fully deployed across the continent. But if we step down, so how many of them are actually integrated with a national ID? how many are actually integrated with birth registration, and how many are trying to connect in to a data exchange system. So you see that from the original intention, the practice is got a long way to go. This is, I think, one of the real wake-up calls. If we look at rural areas and we look at primary healthcare clinics, rural police stations, primary schools, and registry offices, you will see that most countries are still mostly paper-based, if not entirely paper-based. There is very little digital transformation going on in those areas where services are actually being delivered. We remain a paper-based continent outside of the capitals of Africa. So that's just a flavor of what the data is that we have collected. Across these other third-party data sets, for example, if you look at the Carnegie Policy Tracker, which one sees that Africa is doing pretty good on data protection law, but if you go to laws governing digital ID, there's pretty much nothing that is going on. So there's a lot of information in here. Perhaps too many indicators at this stage. We've decided to go broad at this point in time, and maybe the bank in future would like to sort of narrow that down to be more purposeful to its means. But yeah, this is a flavor of the stuff that we've been doing, and sort of interested if you get any feedback and any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Bill, and thank you, Alison. I think, Bill, while you have the mic, there was a question from Hayal on the chat. Hayal, I don't know if you'd like to come in.
Hi. No, I just, sorry, I have some bandwidth issues here, but I just wanted, it's excellent, this whole, and will it be possible to, when is it going live, first of all, and second, or is it live already? So if I look at the framing which Alison had proposed, so how does it read into that framing of a political economy? Or is this a standalone exercise, which just to start with the status of connectivity, digital IDs, etc.? So that's one question. And how do you then propose to then link it to the basic thesis of this?
Alison, for a start, we did the mapping exercise ahead of the case studies, and I think there's could well be an iterative loop where now, on the basis of when we end up with a roadmap of now sort of reflecting that more closely within this mapping. The one problem with that is that a lot of the political economy analysis does involve qualitative assessments that are a lot harder to quantify. But Alison, do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having spoken so long already, and I really wasn't going to say anything else. Let me just quickly say, because I did run through that slide because I was running late. So just for people who aren't as familiar with this project as Pael might as well be, the four components of this project are the mapping exercise, which is really, the first just like empirical mapping of what's going on. And it's also attempting to move beyond some of the kind of accepted indicators that are in the maturity indexes and assessments and those kinds of things, and trying to find proxies for some of those qualitative ones, but not in any way hoping that we can go from the mapping to the political economy analysis. This is all an empirical base in order to do the analysis. But the mapping is very iterative, or there was a very iterative process between the mapping and the metadata from that for each country and the political economy framing of the cases, which you will have to wait for the next community of practice installment to get the cases, but the next one we will be doing the cases. And then from the cases, we did go back to the mapping and say, oh, we're missing that, or that wasn't right, or we still need this. And that actually threw up some of these other things on registries, the lack of digitalization of registries and other really important stuff. So that's been an important exercise. And then the mapping and the cases feeds into the implementation roadmap, which we are just in the process is generic roadmap, but which can be customized, contextualized on the basis of the country that the bank is investing in.
So, and just a follow-up question, and because this is in the context of importing quote unquote DPI from, say, India, or having an African chapter of DPI implementation, which is very contextual to not only to the continent but to each country's specificities. I absolutely agree with the framing that it need not just be imported, cut and pasted, etc., because the institutional, the capabilities differ. But I just what I struggle with is, is this project trying to just provide the context in which DPIs are being implemented, or because solutions wise, it's a long road and it's a tall order. There can never be a perfect solution. And in one of the other community of practice presentations done by Thomas and his team from Research ICT Africa, they had a very good list of governance principles, etc., which I said even India cannot achieve those governance principles, so they are kind of a wish list. So I think every country, when you're looking at, of course, this data set gives you the status, so to speak, on capabilities, be it on data protection, maturity index, etc. Not on competition, but that also can be baked in. What are the trade-offs which the continent should be willing to accept? Because running after the best may also deprive the continent from the good. You're on mute, Alison.
I'm going to answer quickly, and then I might actually ask Sohila or somebody else to come in. So, Payal, this is, as I said in the beginning, we can put up a perfect human rights framework and all of these things that are often, either explicit or implicit in some of these papers. But those are not, we're not going to get to those immediately. And in the African Union Data Policy Framework, for example, we have this notion of progressive realization of principles and objectives, so that we recognize that these are important. And, as I said, not only from a kind of human rights or democracy or whatever perspective, but also from an economic inclusion perspective. So drawing on the political economy side of it as well, until people are, included in the economy effectively and in decision making, you actually don't get successful economic outcomes. So that is the framework in which we are going to try to demonstrate to states that if they want, to improve state formation, if they want to improve these service deliveries, etc., these are the principles that you'll need. So data governance is not simply about, having a data protection law. It's actually about that trust framework, to build. And the data protection law doesn't really build that trust unless it's in the context of equity or justice, and that it's actually being implemented and can have an effect on people. So it's not a kind of immediate solution. It's providing developing the evidence, looking through the cases at what is in place and what is working and what's not working and where the gaps are, and then demonstrating in the implementation framework how, if you want to achieve these various things that we've shown up, we understand as critical to realizing public value, that you would need to implement certain governance frameworks on top of the infrastructure that's already been identified.
Yeah. Thank you.
Some more questions in the chat, I think.
Yeah, I'm seeing a question from Mariam. Mariam, do you want to come in, or should I just... Given your finding that national data exchange systems often don't translate into subnational participation, how should this change the way the AFDB designs and sequences its DPI investments? Alison, do you want to take that? Or...
So I'm happy to, but I'm really happy for other people to jump in. So Miriam, thanks. It's a really important question. I suppose the first thing to say is that we are still, working on exactly what you should do in terms of sequencing and, the kind of allocation of resources that we needed to do this. What we have already posited from the cases is that at the moment, in almost all the cases except one, where it's sort of been done in parallel, the data exchange is done last. And the data exchange and the trust framework generally are bolted on at the end. And so what we've been arguing is that it is absolutely vital that you get these governance frameworks in place in advance of setting up your digital ID system, of setting up your digital payment systems. That this is the kind of not only the glue, this is the framework that kind of holds it all together and makes it an integrated thing. So we think sequencing is quite a critical issue. And then, of course, if by you mean subnational at kind of either provincial or municipal level, I think in some of the case studies that's quite well acknowledged, although very difficult to implement from a national up. In one of the cases, at least that I'm familiar with, there's actually the municipal level is kind of more advanced, but it's not integrated into the national system. So it's more advanced in the sense that you have an integrated municipal data system, but that, is advanced what's happening at the national level, but it's not integrated into the national system yet. So setting up that national system so that it obviously an integrated national system. And as I said, a lot of this we already have in our African Union data policy framework that speaks about the centrality of setting up the national data standards and interoperability and those kinds of things. But those very often, the technical aspects of the data exchange are sometimes there or have been recognized as needing to be done without the recognition that these technical decisions are actually, they govern the governance. They need to be accompanied by some of the other governance aspects of data as well, the data protection aspects of it, and security aspects of it as well. Security is often in the technical stuff, but we think with sequencing is very critical, and I think we have a lot of lessons on that from previous technology evolutions.
Thanks, Alison. Sohila, I saw your hand up. Please come in.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I wanted to react to the comment on how to build in Africa DPI, and also how to build on the outcome of the G20 of 2025 under the South Africa presidency, where DPI was among the top priorities. Like, as mentioned by Alison, like there is already a number of frameworks and that speak to DPI, like the AU data policy framework, the African Union framework on digital ID, we have e-commerce strategy, we have digital trade protocols under CFTA. They are all can contribute to development of continental framework. Now, like as part of African Union participation in the G20, there is now recommendation to move towards developing a continental roadmap on DPI implementation in Africa. So we know that many countries, they are progressive, that are investing in digital IDs, they are in e-government platforms, and also there is also an increasing number of countries that are working on the national data policies and also start working on developing national data exchanges ecosystem. Like for us, as part of the implementation of the African Union data policy framework, we supported African countries to develop their national data policies. And so far we have 10, they validated their national data policies. And as part of the national policies, as I said, like there is this establishment of the national data exchange or national data ecosystem. Like it is ongoing, but from our side, we feel that we need to come up with this continental approach, like to ensure that there is harmonization of policies, and also there is interoperability of digital systems across the continent. So to do this, like we are at early stage of working on this, and we welcome this webinar and the outcome of this study, which will inform the work that the African Union plans to undertake maybe in the next year. This year, we plan to start maybe to having kind of engagement with countries to say where they stand and also what are the ambitions of the African countries. As you know, that countries, they are at different levels of digital readiness, and we need to take this into account. So like for us, we really aim to have this kind of whole of society and government approach. I see the question from Kuku-san about how the difference between the two, and for us, I think there is maybe to have the two at the same time, to have the whole of government approach and also the whole of society approach. Because for Africa, DPI can be the game changer, that can be the like digital backbone that accelerate the development and also the economy of the continent. We feel that if DPI is well developed with the right safeguards and also like all the necessary consultations around the DPI development to ensure that all African citizens, they can access to digital services, it can be like the opportunity to close or to narrow the digital divide that is affecting our continent. So I really appreciate the conversation today, and we look forward for the upcoming webinars to continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sohila, most definitely. And thank you for joining. We do hope that you will be part of the subsequent webinars that we have planned.
Could I just? I was just going to add one thing that is missing from a country view of Africa is that I think it would be really good to add to this a regional dimension, and the extent to which regional initiatives, whether those be infrastructure or governance, that's an area that is missing from the mapping at the moment.
Thanks, Bill.
Right.
I'm trying to look.
Are there any more questions, Diana?
Yes, I'm trying to look through the chat. I see a hand
I
from
was
Michelle.
just, I see Michelle has her hand up, but I was just going to say also if anybody'd like to, from any country, like to test Bill's map and see if it makes sense to them, that would be great as well.
Thank you. It's really fascinating to hear this. So thanks for the session. Interesting to hear, Bill, that you said that the mapping doesn't show the regional aspect. And by that, from Open Cities Lab, we work quite a lot with digital public infrastructure at a local government level. So the municipal or regional base, both in the infrastructure and the governance side. And I'm not sure that I have a question, except maybe to understand in terms of the sequencing or the investment decisions. And I suppose some of my question has been answered by you, Bill, saying that it's not in the mapping maybe yet or at this stage. But how does that local government and the DPI connection to national government, DPI, how does that play out in the bank's investment decisions or in the best case sequencing scenarios? I'm not sure my question is very clear, but maybe it's just more a statement from my side just to say that we've seen that kind of local government connection into the national DPI quite key in uptake and service delivery change, which ultimately reaches the residents or those who the public services are serving or impacting. So I think maybe the question is just to say, how are you approaching that more regional or local government level to understand the sequencing and better best investment decisions. I'm happy if there's no answer right now. I guess that's part of what I'm here to learn and understand in the subsequent CUPs.
Yeah, so, sorry, by regional, I meant sort of supranational.
Okay, yeah.
To go subnational at this level, theoretically, it's possible. The cost is just, yeah. I think it would cost hundreds of thousands on AI tokens to get to that level.
Yes.
Michelle, did you mean in practice or in the mapping exercise?
Well, in the mapping, it would be interesting to see it at a subnational level, but that is clearly not quite possible yet, which is fine. I think there's other ways to kind of come to that information, I suppose.
Thanks, Michelle. Babatunde, please come in.
Yes, thanks. Thanks very much, Bill. I really love the mapping tool you shared. Yeah, I just want to ask you about, I didn't see a section on legislation undergirding DPI. I'm not sure if you have that, especially because a lot of African legislation is still stuck on ID level, national ID, right? There seems to be less progress on national legislation that maps onto the DPI stage or age per se, especially AI developments, and the way it works in Africa, if there is no national legislation, right, it can bog down the whole DPI enterprise. We could look at the case of Kenya some years back, where the government launched an ID program, but it was scaled back because there was no enabling legislation. So do you have anything in scope to look at what is the progress on legislation for DPI in Africa, particularly for the AI age? Thank you very much.
So in each one of the sections, there are variables on strategy, policy, and legislation. The one key word you said there, which isn't there, is the progress. So this is at this stage, it is not a maturity model. I mean, it is a snapshot at any given time, and so I think that it is a really interesting challenge, and I think it's something that does need to be looked at. Is that how do you turn this into a maturity model that tracks progress over time?
Thanks. I think his question has been answered. I see there's an ongoing chat from Amea. Amea, I don't know if you want to come in and just share your thoughts, comments, reflections. I think we have about 5 minutes left.
Thanks, Diana. I typed in something more extensive, but basically, I think that if we're talking about DPI that are going to be used in the near future, it's worth thinking about the design of a DPI system and the surrounding governance and processes that will, in fact, work with both paper and natively digital data. Because we're not going to get to, I used to work for an organization that made software for city governments. And I've seen from the inside how the sausage of getting to a property tax registry that's fully digital looks like. And it is slow and it is painful and it is expensive. So I think it's actually worth really centering and framing this question of, yes, it's a DPI, but a bunch of the records that are coming into it are going to start their life as paper and then going to turn digital. That was what I was thinking of when Bill was presenting on the low uptake of digitalization in rural areas. I don't think that's going to change soon.
Could I give an example of where I think it should be happening? So if you take DHIS2, which is a mobile-based health management information system, and typically in most countries, primary healthcare clinics fill out a monthly huge paper form that goes up to a district statistician, and they key it into the system. The way in which that happens is that the paper form is filled in by administrators, not by health workers, and so they are producing a kind of non-expert interpretation of what has happened. And I think there is a very strong argument to say that, in fact, tablet-based collection by health workers, as opposed to monthly paper filling by administrators, is a cost-effective way to move. Admittedly, if you just take that one system, I think if you look at it and say, can we digitize this whole system at source overnight, as opposed to taking an agile, incremental approach to it? But I just feel one shouldn't be giving up on this area.
So, and just to add to that, while you're looking for somebody, or if there is somebody, but I mean, I think more generally to that point is also the point that we haven't made of how, in the African context, how important it is to retain and the expenses the costs that go with that, which several of our case studies have highlighted, but the need to keep analog systems available until we've addressed these problems and fast tracked them, and that's I think a much bigger cost and concern for most developing countries.
Thanks, Alison. And I see there are people in agreement with you on the chat. I don't see any other comments, any other hands. I hope I'm not closing anyone off. We're coming to the end of the webinar, but I will definitely find a way of sharing the map. I think I just saw one person share the email, but we'll definitely find a way of sharing the map and any other progress that we make, and keep you in touch with the work that we're doing. But this is, like I said, it's the first webinar that we are doing. We'll have 3 more. Thomas posted it on the chat. So the next one will be on the country case studies, and we'll go deeper into what we're seeing, the commonalities and the differences between the countries that we are studying. And then we'll look at the implementation roadmap, and then kind of close off and come back to the political economy issue that we've just kind of touched on today. So thank you so much. I think I'll call on Thomas to just kind of give the next steps, kind of speak to where we are at, and then we'll close it off.
Could I just say quickly that the map is temporarily on a site of my own, and that is not its permanent home, and it will move at some point.
It would be great for people to sense check it and to give us feedback. Yeah, delighted for some crowdsourcing on that, or at least for Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, everyone. That was great. The next steps are in the chat. You can see when our next webinars are coming up. And we look forward to discussing our various outputs and deliverables with you in a month's time.